All right, so I will introduce your first speaker, which is me. I'm a developmental. I'm Maria Stanley. I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician and medical director here at the Wasteman Center. But today I'm going to be talking in my research role about building research collaborations to help us understand more about co-occurring conditions in children and adults with Down syndrome. And I'm going to start with a really busy slide, but I think it just gives us, this is not even every condition that can affect people with Down syndrome differentially or more often than others in the general population. People with Down syndrome have just about every system of their body can be affected. And I think one of the things from a research perspective that puzzles many of us is how can all of these folks who have an extra copy of the 21st chromosome have such an array of presentations or, different things that affect them. So some folks seem to have very few of these co-occurring medical or neuropsychiatric conditions, and some folks seem to have so many of these things all at once, and we don't really understand exactly why. And so understanding more is going to be really helpful as we move forward. I'm sharing a slide that I had shared once previously. I shared this a similar slide in 2020 with some information about publications. This isn't for the whole decade. This is just for those calendar years, but this is medical publications related to Down syndrome. And you can see that early on, there was very, very little. And part of it was that folks with Down syndrome just often weren't included in research. And so having research centers like this one that were really dedicated to understanding more about conditions like this has made a difference. Other factors that have made a difference is really the activism and energy from the Down syndrome community saying, we want to be part of this. We want to be included. We want to understand more, and we want our lives to be better. And we want you to help us get there. We want research. We want to work with researchers, but we want to be part of that. And so that activism has really paid off. And you can see that just over the last couple of decades, things have really changed substantially, and we're seeing so much more information. Part of that activism on the part of families led to a congressional directive and the formation of the NIH Include project. Now, many of you have heard about that before. This isn't brand new, but for those who haven't, Include stands for Investigation of Co-occurring Conditions Across the Lifespan to Understand Down Syndrome. But the Include name really reflects the spirit, which is including everyone in this community. The aims of the project were really to conduct high-risk, high-reward basic science studies on chromosome 21, to assemble a large study population or cohort of individuals with Down syndrome, and then to conduct clinical trials that include people with Down syndrome. So really, those three components, but really with the idea that we could start to think about how do we address some of the challenges that people face from a medical or neuropsychiatric perspective. Again, the goal, some of this I already mentioned, but this is across the NIH centers. So the National Institutes of Health are multiple centers, and this project really goes across many, many different centers. And the idea is that we will investigate conditions that affect people with Down syndrome, including many of those medical conditions that I mentioned at the beginning, that will increase the number of investigators and trainees. And so one of the ways that research happens is it requires funding. And this funding has made a huge difference in the number of people that are able to do this work because of having adequate funding. And then to really engage people with Down syndrome and their families from a range of backgrounds, people who live in cities, people who live in rural areas who may not have the same resource accesses that somebody who lives right near an academic center might have. You know, people who are young, people who are old, people who have, you know, a range of different abilities. And I'll talk more about that as I talk about this project as well. So again, the goals and objectives are organized around 5 themes: basic research, or what we think of as like lab-based research, cohort development or assembling study populations, like I mentioned, clinical research looking at co-occurring conditions, living and aging with Down syndrome and looking at services, and then finally having, you know, under this big umbrella, research infrastructure and tools that everybody who's participating can use. This was a new slide that was just shared by one of our collaborators at the NIH, sort of highlighting some of the work that's happened. So many awards funded, many funding opportunities made available, over 450 research publications, attendance at community events by members of the Include team, lots of NIH collaborators, 15 clinical trials, which is really a lot and meaningful. And then right now, this work has represented almost 8,000 people with Down syndrome in our country. And this is just, again, to give you an idea about that funding and what a big difference that's made. And I think you can see that this graph kind of parallels the number of study publications that there have been in the recent past. And so funding in general that it doesn't include, that's not part of Include, is in the yellow. And you can see that it's been roughly stable, maybe grown a little bit over time, but that Include funding has just made that mountain taller and really increased what's been available. And so now I'm going to talk about some new work that's just happening. This is the Down syndrome cohort development program. And the idea is that this program works in partnership with people with Down syndrome and their families to learn about Down syndrome and to create future opportunities for research participation. This is a newly funded group of initiatives, and I love that on this slide that, you know, right there is keeping the Down syndrome community at the heart of our efforts to create an inclusive Down syndrome research program. So the ideas behind this CDP, Down syndrome CDP, is to improve our understanding of the natural history of Down syndrome. So what does Down syndrome look like over time? What does it look like for babies? What does it look like for toddlers, school-age children, teens, young adults, older folks, you know, just looking over time to better understand the frequency and variability of co-occurring conditions. So some things we have broad ideas about, but it's interesting sometimes, like when I try to find a number, like how often does this condition happen in Down syndrome? One paper says 7%, another paper says 45%. There was a time, for example, that autism, it said like 1%, and that we know that it's so much higher than that. And so, you know, I think we have had inconsistent data, and that having this large scale group of people is really going to help us understand that more and understand the kind of health and developmental surveillance and care and supports that people need. We're working to increase our understanding of the broad range of presentations of Down syndrome and really paying attention to neurocognitive or thinking and learning skills, health-related and functional outcomes in a broad range of folks. To examine the impact of things in our environment, so where we live, some social factors, experiences that we have, and environmental factors, how those things impact our outcomes, and then to expand our understanding of currently used therapeutics or medications or treatments or therapies across the lifespan and develop data that helps us initiate drug trials and other kinds of interventions that could make a meaningful difference for people. So the bottom line is we're trying to understand the range of things that determine risk and also resilience, what helps people do well and thrive at levels spanning from the individual to society. The way that this is planned to happen, and again, this is a project that's just getting off the ground and people are still working on developing exactly what this looks like. But the idea is that we would develop a comprehensive deep phenotyping and biosample acquisition protocol. So many big words, but really what it means is that there's a bunch of different studies that are part of this, but that all of us are going to work together to have a common protocol or common elements of what we're gathering so that we can get all of that information for, the people that are participating. We're going to be collecting demographic, clinical, laboratory, biospecimen, and biospecimen it's just a fancy way of saying like lab tests and DNA, things like that we might want to learn more about, and then also imaging data from people with Down syndrome to really help us discover and validate new treatments. And then outreach and recruitment are part of this effort. And this is a busy slide, and I really debated about whether to include it because it's kind of small words and lots going on. But I really wanted, again, just to highlight that I love that what's front and center, the top of the slide, is the Down syndrome community and input from the community to make this all happen. And that then this DSCDP includes a data coordinating center to kind of bring all the data that we're gathering together, a biorepository to house those lab and samples like blood work, and then a clinical cohort coordinating center, so sort of a central administrative group of people that are helping manage all of this work that's happening, and then a number of sites that are participating. And I chose to put our site first, but our site has a study called Metabolic Health, Lifestyle, and Risk of Co-occurring Health Conditions in Down Syndrome with the shortened version of METDS, and our group includes collaborators at University of Pittsburgh, Kansas University Medical Center, and the University of California, Irvine. Other studies that are happening include, and again, all these groups are working together, advancing the lives and health of youth and young adults with Down syndrome, or ALLI-DS, the Infant Down Syndrome Baby Brain Study, so looking at a group of very young children that's calling itself IBIS. And I realized this morning I was looking at my slides and I have a question mark there. I think that's Washington University, but I wasn't sure because it said WU. So anyway, and then the Down Syndrome Early Childhood Omics Deep Phenotyping and Epidemiology in Texas, which goes by Dakota. Thank goodness there's a short name. And then the Human Trisome Project Latin American Network. So again, this is like a whole other group of individuals, and this is a collaboration between sites in the US and Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. And so, this is just going to help us get a really nice broad representation. Our site team consists of Segan Hartley, who's our main PI, and brings expertise in cognitive development and lifestyle assessment in Down syndrome. Dr. Plant, who is a psychiatrist and who brings his expertise in sleep medicine. Myself, developmental behavioral pediatrician. Michelle Pulfus, who's a doctoral nurse researcher who brings expertise in obesity, nutrition, and community recruitment. Luis Columna, who brings expertise in physical activity and community recruitment. Chung Chang, our Wasteman director, who brings his expertise in molecular processes and genetics. Daifeng Wang, who brings expertise in biostatistics, and then a community advisory board that's yet to be named. So we do already have a central advisory board that at the national level that's been part of the early planning, and now at a site level we're also working to develop those community advisory boards. So again, I think over and over, as I was thinking about this, like one of the central themes is really a strong commitment to community engagement with these central and local community advisory boards, with families telling us, you know what, that is going to be too much for somebody to do on one day. Or, you know what, that sounds really invasive. Is there another way to do that? So that, even though we would love to collect all this different information, we have to be cognizant that, of the people that are doing this and contributing to this research, and really thinking about how do we make it as person friendly as possible. And then really using that central tenet of nothing about us without us, including compensation for the people who are generously sharing their time to help develop these projects, using a team approach throughout. Again, we want to be inclusive and think about a range of different folks that might want to participate, and then a plan to give back to the community. So once this information is gathered, we really need to have a plan about how do we share the information back in language that anybody can understand. And this is more information about specific things that are going to be happening at this cohort site. Some of this is still just, this was initial proposal, but it really is being developed in terms of what kind of information are we going to be gathering? What is that going to look like? So right now, what we're thinking is, some clinical labs, things like blood pressure, and looking at cardiac fitness and motor ability and strength, and looking at a person's size and how active they are and how they're sleeping, and looking at diet and a range of different things that might contribute to health outcomes. And we're fortunate, for our site, that several of the people that are participating at our site are also ABCDS investigators. And that stands for the Alzheimer's Biomarker Consortium for Down syndrome. And many of you may have heard Segan or Dr. Brad Christian speaking about the work that's happening there. But what it does is link the work that we're doing with younger folks to the same kind of information that we're gathering with older folks to give us that lifespan perspective. And that's just a really simple introduction to something that's still under development. It's a work in progress, and so you may hear some really different, interesting things the next time you hear back about this study, but we're excited about it, and I think it just represents the kind of many different centers across the country and even internationally pulling together to gather this information. And then, as I said, I'm going to share that QR code again. That's for our Down syndrome hub here at the Wasteman Center. So the study I was talking about is under development, not recruiting yet. But this is information that you can potentially use right now. And one of the things I just want to draw your attention to is under studies recruiting. If you go to that page, here's the QR code for that. But these are studies that are currently currently looking for people to participate, and that includes a hypoglossal nerve stimulator study that I'm a part of and really excited about. And then Dr. Lutovsky's study, Dr. Sterling's study, the Alzheimer's Biomarker Consortium that I mentioned, and the Wasteman Biolibrary, which I think has a table out front if you're interested in learning more. So we invite you to participate. We invite you to be a part of our community. And that's all I wanted to share this morning, but I'm happy to take questions if there are things that people have questions about. Yeah.
How prevalent is Down syndrome now versus the 70s?
The prevalence hasn't changed dramatically over time. It's around 1 in 700 people. And so it's a large number, when we think about our entire country. And there has been some data collected about variation over time. It can be, and in different places in the world, the frequency looks different. But that number has been relatively stable.